Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. My name is David Mills. I'm the Centre for Global Higher Education Director, and it's 14th of May, and it's great to be welcoming Flora, Albert, and Jonathan for this CG webinar on collectively reimagining teaching and learning in East Africa. We haven't had many webinars on East African higher education. And having done my own research in Uganda once upon a time, this is a great. I'm really pleased and honoured to be hosting Flora and Albert and John to talk about an important project that they've been doing together as an action research project to think about curriculum design with a consortium of universities in Tanzania and Uganda. So it's great to have you all. Thank you very much for coming. And as always, I'm going to start with a few housekeeping points just to remind everybody. The way we run our webinars is that we tend to have an hour session and a half an hour talk. We'll record this webinar, so do tell your colleagues and friends that, that this is available on our website, as along with more than 400 webinars we already have, and working papers and briefs as well. As normal, and for those of you new to the webinar, we tend to ask people to stay muted. So make sure that you do have your audio muted, and you can obviously watch the video and have the screen and speaker view. Please use the chat function to ask questions or add comments along the way. And then towards the end, I will invite you to come forward and to ask your questions once we've heard from Flora and Albert and John. I think that's probably all you need to know. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm now going to ask John and to introduce Albert and Flora and the team. And looking forward to this really important topic, because we talk a lot about research, but we don't talk enough about teaching and learning. So John, Albert, Flora, over to you.
Thanks very much, David, for the welcome, and it's great to be here today. I am Jon Harle. I'm the Executive Director of INAF, which is based in Oxford, although I'm in Germany today. And I'm going to introduce my two colleagues, Professor Flora Fabian, who is the founding Vice-Chancellor of Mwanza University in Tanzania. He's also affiliated to the University of Dodoma, and has previously worked at Muhimbili University in Dar es Salaam. And Flora is a Professor of Anatomy. And Dr. Albert Luswata, who's a Senior Lecturer in Philosophy at Uganda Martyrs University and the former Director of the Institute of Ethics there. And we're going to talk to you about a project, as David said, very much an action research project, which goes by the name TESCEA, Transforming Employability for Social Change in East Africa. And like most projects, it had a beginning and an end, but for us, it's very much an ongoing program of work and of partnership. And I know David is keen to explore sort of new global directions for the centre. And my two colleagues here, Flora and Albert, are some of the most inspiring people I've had the fortune to work with. And they're really breaking new ground in teaching and learning in East Africa. And so there's a lot to learn from them. We're going to talk today about a piece of work that united 4 universities. They are the universities here listed on the left: Gulu University in Uganda, Uganda Martyrs University, University of Dodoma in Tanzania, and Mazumbe University in Tanzania, as well as 3 other partners: the Association for Faculty Enrichment in Learning and Teaching, which is a Kenyan academic association; Ashoka East Africa, which is the regional hub of the Social Entrepreneurs Network, and INASP, my institution. And the 4 universities range in size from around 4,000 to 5,000 students for Gulu, Mazumbe, Uganda Martyrs, to 30,000 in the case of Dodoma. and they're based in second towns, in cities, and in rural communities. The oldest is Mazumbe, which was originally founded in the 1950s as a provincial training college for local government, and the youngest is Dodoma, which was established as a major new public university in Tanzania in about 2007. And each of these institutions has a real commitment to serving its community, expressed in different ways. And that was very much at the heart of this work we did together and we're still doing together. The project was funded through a grant initially from the UK government as part of its strategic partnership for higher education, innovation and reform programme. We were lucky to have the support of a few CGHE members as we designed and embarked on this work. So, including David in the early stages, Rebecca Shendel, who is now in Boston, and Diana Lorelei at UCL Institute of Education. And we were motivated by some concerns that would be familiar to many of you wherever you're based. I think there's a lot in common here for universities and the communities across the world, but that there were disconnects in expectations between what universities could and should be doing. There was and are very pressing issues of graduate employment and unemployment rates and youth employment across the region. There was a sense that students weren't developing the kinds of skills they really needed, the skills to think critically, to solve problems, and to learn very much how to think and not what to think. And there were particular challenges for young women in many institutions who weren't able to thrive and succeed in the learning environments in which they found themselves in. We were also motivated by wish to take a very different approach to lots of the projects and programs we observed. So very much centering the expertise, the solutions and the talent of East African academics and positioning them to really be the kind of authors and the drivers of change. To find ways to enable change to happen more quickly and to bring change to students in the classroom sooner, so faster than the usual rounds of curriculum review, which we're often familiar with, and to design and to test and to build something which not only would help us to achieve our aims, goals, but which we hoped would give tools and models and methods which could be used to scale this beyond the core institutions and teaching programs we worked with to other institutions, to other degree programs and to other faculty. So without further ado, let me hand over to Flora now, who's going to tell you something about how we did this. Flora, over to you.
Thank you, John. I will briefly talk on our journey. As John has introduced the motivation, I will go into how we did our approach. So from the introduction of actually complaints and the observations that there was a high rate of unemployment, maybe not only in East Africa, but elsewhere. And therefore, we embarked on an approach where we can bring about critical thinking, problem solving, and a method that brings the requirements of both men and women in the teaching space, which we named the gender responsive pedagogies, and of course the 21st century competencies such as blended learning, IT tools that support learning, and so forth. And the approach was not limited to only certain types of professions such as education, but we went across other professions, including healthy, that's medicine and nursing, IT, computer engineering, agriculture, and business. And as John mentioned, we redesigned at course level. We did not need to overhaul the entire program, but started with the course level within programs. And this is because we wanted a quicker change. It was easy to evaluate at course level, to get feedback, and definitely to learn from the approach as faster as possible. And as we wanted to have the change centered within the region, we started with academics and program managers who redesigned their course in one semester, and it will be implemented in the next semester. And at the end of that teaching semester, we could evaluate and get feedback from both academics and students. And we started with enabling academics to teach for critical thinking. And therefore, we started with the concept of transformative learning journey, where the academics and program managers started with the transformation, both cultural, structural, and of course, at individual level, about the philosophy of teaching. And we drew our theories from various various literature, and of course, previous educators who have talked about self-reflection, reflective thinking, and meaning-making in our programs. And we assumed that academics and program managers were at the center of actually bringing the change. And therefore, these ones, they will embark on helping their students to participate effectively in class and apply the critical thinking pedagogies. And therefore, we convened a series of workshops with academics and program managers, where we encouraged them to formulate their own philosophies of learning, of course, based on literature, on what transformative learning and meaning making can actually bring into our learners. And therefore, we argued that the facilitator is important in the process of engaging the students or the learners in learning for reflective learning, and therefore develop critical thinking amongst the learners. And therefore, instead of just the teaching for transmitting knowledge, it is teaching for critical thinking, problem solving, and of course, gender responsive pedagogy, where both women and men are brought together in the learning space. And in a summary, we started with what we called program alignment, that is profiling the ideal graduate. And we did this by bringing together the education stakeholders, including government, policymakers, regulators, the community itself, and employers, plus, of course, senior management, because senior management were to bring on board the change. And once we had agreed now in each course, what kind of a graduate do we want to produce at the end of that course? And this was also done by, we mapped this to Fink's taxonomy of significant learning. The transformative learning approach, as we mentioned, it was for critical thinking and problem solving, and therefore exercises that engaged academics in reflective observation and active experimentation of the process. And during this time, we also identified those academics who were enthusiastic right from the beginning to become multipliers for the purpose of course, bringing, raising capacity at local level, but of course, using the local capacity in bringing the change. So we had now a group of multipliers who supported in facilitating course redesign. And for course redesign, we had lecturers from those courses who mapped the concepts and, of course, crafted the learning outcomes. We call them intended learning outcomes, the teaching activities, which will bring about the intended learning outcomes, and a type of assessments that will actually match the intended learning outcomes. And we used a tool which we call learning design, which is a tool which allowed us to introduce to the lecturers on how to map their intended learning outcome, bringing on board the various aspects of learning, including application, including integration, the human aspect, the care, and therefore a student is going to be able to learn about themselves, to relate with the concept, and how the concept generally is going to bring on board the other professionals within the program from different causes. And we did this, and then this learning design, of course, allowed us to be able to evaluate and be able to judge how much change has happened using the dimensions of learning. 3 factors were considered, and these are important. I know Jon has mentioned it, but the change had to be rooted within the East African region, and therefore we had building East African expertise and experience. Of course, this at the end could be applied at a wider level in Africa and elsewhere. The second factor was that the East African educators and program managers had to lead the change so that we can have a significant change, which is created within the region and could be adapted elsewhere. The third factor was partnership. As we mentioned from the beginning, partnership was important, where universities partnered with various stakeholders who are employers and who are actually the ones who will guide the market. And of course, the community, the industry were brought on board. And it was good that we used these stakeholders through the joint advisory groups, where we could interact with the university management and students and academics. So together, this partnership was based on a mutual kind of respect and trust, that the feedback that we are receiving from the employers, from the policymakers, from the regulators, are actually the ones that we are all together as partners want to bring on board. And of course, we valued the knowledge which was being brought by each of the partners. And we did collaborative work, and we had to invite, we also invited the stakeholders in various activities within the university, and therefore acted as role models. And students were brought on board in this kind of partnership. And then this brought about consensus on decision-making, on what kind of skills the students require based on the feedback or inputs that we received from the stakeholders. So there, I think I'm done with the process. Jon, I will bring the mic back to you so that Albert can proceed from there.
Thank you, Flora. Thanks very much. That's a great introduction to what we did and how we did it. Albert, I'll hand straight over to you so you can talk more about what emerged from this process.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to share the results of this project. In the duration of 3 years, we were able to accomplish a lot. First of all, we were able to train over 565 lecturers from the 4 universities, then redesigned over 212 courses in over 100 departments of the 4 universities. And we were able to revise or create 39 policies and guidelines and reached over 3,800 students in the 4 universities. And we observed change in 3 domains. The first domain being the changing teaching practices. We observed a shift in the teaching practices of the academics in the 4 universities. We noted a growing wish to engage the students in the learning process, unlike before where they were passive. And we noted that 91% of the academics used gender-responsive pedagogies, 80% were using critical thinking techniques, and 94% of the senior managers of the 4 universities said the changes were very important to their institutions. And 2/3 reported that their institutions were very supportive of institutionalizing these changes. So that was very important. We also noted the use of critical thinking and problem-solving techniques increased by 43 percentage points in the universities, and the use of active learning strategies increased by 37 percentage points, while the use of complex problem-based and team-based learning strategies increased by 15 percentage points, while the use of gender-responsive pedagogies by 45 percentage points. We looked also at the lesson plans of the academics, and they were assessed excellent, 1 in 3 of them, and 2/3 were assessed as good. So there are a lot of improvements there. I want to share some notable quotes from the academics in the 4 universities. One said, students are not empty vessels. When you give them the opportunity to interact, to share what they have, they will learn how to solve problems themselves. And then another said, when we are in class, let them think what we are teaching. Think on the scenarios, think on the problems facing their society. And then the other one said, I started to analyze myself. Did I manage to create creative students who are free to express themselves and to work in different kinds of environments? Now I have to find ways of enabling students to participate, interact, and give their ideas. And the last one said, I have loved my experience. I've shifted my mental model about learning. We also, the second moment was the shift in the learning processes of students. And The students we observed became more responsible of their learning. Previously, they were always passive, expecting to be given, but they are no longer that when they engaged more in the learning processes. They were the protagonists. Well, they also said they felt more valued in the learning process and listened to, unlike before. 87% of the students had a positive experience of the new teaching and learning. They expressed this, while the surveys indicated shifts in the student learning practices, and particularly in the use of critical thinking and problem-solving approaches. We noted increases in the proportion of students feeling they were better able to apply the facts and theories and methods in practice. Also to examine their own views on a given issue, changing the way they thought about a concept and formulating their own questions and connecting ideas from their students to their own experience. While others, many of them could clarify their personal values and ethics and understand others' views. So there were a lot of changes in the learning of the students, as you have noted. I wanted to read some quotes here from the students. One said, "It allowed me," referring to the experience of the trainings and the change, "it allowed me to have an open mind. Life is not a straight arrow. Having a willing and open mind allows me for flexibility." While another one said, "This has helped me to learn to appreciate the importance of working as a group or team," referring to the teamwork they were having in classes. While another one said, "I have learned to make right decisions. After weighing current situations at hand, it's something that has enabled me to handle various situations in the community." While the last one said, "My thinking and the way of perceiving things have totally changed from focusing on how to get employed to how to improve my community by starting something that solves their problems while at the same time making money." So those were some of the sharings from the students showing the changing learning process. The last domain was the institution, the change in the institutions. And we noted structural and policy changes. Various policies and guidelines were developed during the course of the project and passed by the universities. At some of these universities, they founded centers for teaching and learning as a consequence of this project. At Kulu University, they even went on to develop a certificate course. And any member who underwent this was to get automatic promotion. You know very well in many of our universities in the region, promotion is usually tied to publications, research, and not to excellent teaching. And some others had certificate for staff excellent teaching. And then we noted also a positive shift towards the new approaches we proposed in the project by the university managers. At the same time, we had challenges. One of the biggest being the disruption by the pandemic, as we were during the course of the project. This affected both our data collection. We had to change the way we wanted to collect data, and also plans like student placements, which would not be taking place during the closing period. We also had serious resistance when it came to gender from some staff. Some thought it was a women issue and it was not concerning them, but many others were reluctant to initiate difficult questions and conversations about this question. At the same time, there was lack of time to absorb all of these new ideas and thinking about the context, our context where people have huge teaching load, and we did the trainings where they were teaching. it was also difficult to apply some of these new approaches where they had a huge number. Some said they had 1,000 students in one class, 500, 200. So when you bring these new assignments, new types of various assignments, you would find that it was difficult. But also the demand of the project alongside the demanding work schedules was a challenge. And of course, the interruptions from the internet connectivity and power outages were a difficulty we faced during the workshops, especially when we shifted online. I wanted to end by sharing how we achieved change. The first thing, of course, was our common purpose and aligned visions that have been talked about. Of course, our university had already observed the need in the region that has been mentioned, but alone we could do little to adequately address it. So we found other partners with a common purpose and aligned visions, but also with the complementary attributes and expertise and experiences. So this made it easier for us to address the problems in the region. Our partnership, definitely when you have such a diverse group and international partnership, it's not easy, but the major values that we helped us were trust and humility. We were listening to each other, even our lead partner. We were open to the issues because the issues were there definitely, but we were open discussing them. And we reached the decisions by consensus. And this was very, very important. And it even built our personal and organizational relationships and friendship. And the other issue, Flora had mentioned it, this project was rooted in the East African practice. This is particularly very important because even when we benefited from expertise of academics from outside the region, the central role of leading change and much of the expertise came from academics within the region, from the 4 universities and the AFELT group that was mentioned. And this was particularly important for both ownership, because it was not imposed from outside, but also for sustainability after the project ended. And the other very important issue that helped us was the learning along the duration of the project. We're always learning and learning, then adapting. There are things we had planned before, we had to change them and adapt it, and this helped so much. Also, inspiring academics and supporting them to explore change safely. And we did this by making them explore how to teach differently and creating opportunities for them to engage with the stakeholders outside the universities, which was not the case before. But also we had to maintain their enthusiasm and momentum to observe the changes they were making and how to learn from them. The rest of the things can be found in our chapter, it's chapter 22 of our book, Higher Education for Good. Over to you, Jon.
Thank you, Albert. Thank you very much. And just to, obviously we can share these slides later, but just to say that very last link is to a set of recordings made with staff and students talking about their experience and how they found it. So that really it's worth watching it to hear it in their own words. I think it's now back to you, David, for any questions, comments from the audience.
Thank you very much, Jon. Weble Dala, Albert, and colleagues. That was great, very, very interesting. Do welcome comments in the chat. I want to start if that's okay. You have given us this really fascinating account of what you could achieve by working together, bringing these 4 institutions together. It's fair to say these institutions are sort of not not necessarily the oldest in their countries. They are newer. They're not necessarily the sort of the flagship or the national university. But I wanted to know whether you, as a group, felt that you had shaped East African practice, which is what you described in your webinar, beyond your universities. To what extent are colleagues in Makerere or at UDSM even interested in what you're doing and or taking up the ideas? Because that's the point about going to scale, isn't it? Which is that somehow you might begin to change the broader academic culture. So I wonder whether you want to reflect on, what you understand of the different academic cultures in East Africa and how your institutions have been able to, it seems, amazingly turn around or transform a culture of innovation in teaching and learning, which is not that common. As you say, very much, Flora, if the pressure is all on publishing, then the incentives are to focus on that rather than on being a creative, innovative teacher. So it seems to me that you've achieved an amazing thing here. But I wanted to know, A, whether it's going to last, what happens when the funding runs out, and also whether colleagues in other universities in the region have been interested in this and taking it up. So yeah, any of you can answer that question, I guess.
Well, and Albert, both of you have sort of taken this to other universities and been contacted by colleagues in the universities. So, just wonder if you want to take the kind of question about taking it beyond your home institutions.
Thank you, John. I can give a small comment there on our experience. As we said, we brought on board stakeholders from the government. And fortunately, most of the impact was noted on the gender responsive pedagogy. And we have done some facilitation to other higher learning institutions in Tanzania. Of course, you gave an example, David, you gave an example of UDSM, the University of Dar es Salaam, where gender has been rooted. But we have many more universities which have started after the University of Dar es Salaam, which do not have gender centers, who do not have gone through the gender responsive pedagogy. So, for example, at the university, it's a new university, but earlier was a college of the University of Dar es Salaam. We had an opportunity to facilitate there. But also at Mzumbe, they have started a center for learning. And during the inception of that center, we were also invited to facilitate not only on gender responsive pedagogy, but also we did some sessions on the TESCEA approach for critical thinking and problem solving. We also did a workshop at the end of the project. I wouldn't say the end of the project because we are aspiring to go to TESCEA too. So we invited other universities and higher learning institutions. We were able to invite Mipango, which is a higher learning institution mainly on planning and finance. We were able to invite members from a private university, St. John's, which is a medical university. So I would say, and of course, some of our colleagues have gone to ASUA, the Sokoine University of Agriculture, and the TESCEA project has really grown there, and even some publications in their newsletter on the TESCEA project. So scaling has been done within Tanzania to other universities. And I believe in Uganda, there has been also scale up of the TESCEA approach, specifically the critical thinking problem solving skills, bringing up the community to design programs together, to listen to the community on what they need, especially with the agricultural programs, with project management programs, and of course, in gender responsive pedagogy. So there has been a bit of scale up, maybe not to the extent that we were hoping, but we have done some good scale up amongst the higher learning institutions within East Africa.
Great. Thank you, Flora. Albert.
Yeah, maybe to add on that, first of all, thank you for this very important question. Initially, this was a pilot study, and we began with the 4 universities, and you will get to know that the 4 universities and the other partners had previously worked together, so it was easier for them to come together. And the plan was to pilot this. It was not even in the entire universities, the 4 universities. We chose certain departments with the aim of scaling it to the other departments and other universities. And I think this is ongoing. The multipliers that were trained in each university have been doing great work within the universities, but also, like Flora said, they're being invited by other universities slowly. It has not reached the magnitude we want, but I think already the seed is there, and I think wanting to blossom to reach every university.
Good. Well, it sounds as if the answer to my question about continuity is TESCEA 2, if that can be funded, and so you can carry on. We can come back to that, but that's really helpful as a sense of you are having impact beyond your universities. But as you say, it's also within the institutions, and it is about the proof in the pudding. It is about these centers being created, or it's about the promotion requirements changing. It's these things that are the most profound drivers of change, I think, aren't they? So thank you for that. We've got lots of questions in the chat. So I've been asked by Penny Welsh, and well, perhaps the first comment is from Christine Nachejwe, and she just says it was great, and when's the next training? So that's a lovely response from someone who's obviously been part of your community and enjoyed the teaching and learning. But Penny's question is very straightforward, which is, what's been the most difficult aspects of your project? You're all smiling, so there obviously are difficult aspects. Albert, why don't you start? And then Jon, you can come in as well.
Thank you very much. Well, I usually am an optimist. I always look at the positive things, but probably I mentioned it even in my discussion. At the beginning, there were a few challenges which we overcame in terms of we were an international partnership and working in a different context. So when it came to giving, for instance, accountability to our funders, it was very difficult for the funder to understand our context in some cases. I just want to give a very banal example. In Uganda, the famous means of transport to reach quickly wherever you want is it's called boda, which is a motorcycle that it's very informal, but everywhere. These boda people cannot give you, for instance, a receipt for traveling with them, but the funder wanted that we have a receipt, so it was very difficult. And people felt maybe we're not trusted at the beginning. We found a way out, especially by our lead partner, but there was a bit of that misunderstanding because of the different contexts and where the project was done. I would think maybe that was the major one. I would leave Flora and Jon to share the others.
Thank you, Albert. Adding to that, I think that was one of the challenges, especially when you are working with a partnership and you have to follow the international regulations, what was required and what was not. But locally, as we mentioned, we brought on board the various stakeholders. And for them, we needed to really work hard for them to understand the concept and the process, especially with the regulators, the commissions for universities, where we know that they are the ones who direct how curriculum must be designed, how much can a university actually make changes without the approval of the regulator. So we had to be really careful so that the change does not exceed 30%. Unfortunately, yes, if you want to add any new material, if you want to add anything into a program, the change should be within 30%. If it goes beyond 30%, then there is no way you can implement the change without the approval of the regulator.
Gosh.
And therefore, we had to be aware of that all the time, and mainly center our approach on the pedagogies rather than changing the content. So we had very minor changes on the contents, but mostly on the pedagogies of teaching. So that was one of the challenges, but also with the policymakers, for a change to be made with regard to the policy, it has to go to national level. And therefore, we can only make changes that are allowable at the level of the institutions. So all the time, we actually had to observe that. And therefore, you can imagine, now we had to train management, to make management aware of what the project will be doing without actually bringing any misunderstandings between the university management and the regulators and the policymakers. So we had to involve management right from the beginning, and management they understood the program, the project, what it was going to do, how much changes we are going to involve. And basically, we also used the missions of the universities so that our change should be within the university management. So those were the changes which were mainly at managerial level, from the university management to regulators. But Albert has mentioned on the rigidity of the staff. When people have so much to teach, they have a packed program, and you want them to make change so that they can actually apply the new technique, where instead of just coming and teaching and transforming, just passing on the knowledge, allow the students to actually practice and so that it makes meaning. So there we also had some struggle, but once they were trained and they understood the process, and they enjoyed now when students are brought on board, becoming partners, feeling that they are actually listened to in the learning space. So that was a bit tricky.
Flora, I'm glad you used the word enjoyed, because your description of all the trickiness is really quite daunting. Or everything from, as you say, lecturers already have a huge load, and therefore it's hard to sort of took time into redesign. And then if you do redesign, then you have to be careful not to break the university regulations. And as you say, there is a sort of there is a regional regulator as well, isn't there? So there are so many constraints and limitations on building a culture of sort of creativity or innovation. So yes, Penny, thank you for that question. You revealed quite how much everyone has had to struggle with and negotiate, and it sounds like you've learned a lot along the way. So thank you. Should we go on and take a couple other questions? Daniel Idris, you had several questions. Do you want to come in and ask your question?
Yes. Thank you, David, and thanks for organizing this project. I was just wondering whether the project did try to observe any differences across programs, I mean courses, for example, whether the changes you observe, whether from engineering to education to health, whether there were differences and what were they? And with a bit of the qualitative examining the views of teachers and students, were there differences in terms of gender? And did you just focus on public universities or with private universities, and were there differences? I also asked a question on whether you will follow up this to see the retention and sustainability of these changes. But I guess you said it's still ongoing. So maybe just a touch on that one. Thank you.
Can I go?
Please do, Albert. Yes, yeah, thanks, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel, for that very important question. Maybe to clarify, from the beginning, we didn't dwell on a specific program. We brought different faculties on board, including faculties of science, engineering, education, social sciences, and we were having these journeys together. It's very interesting. We discovered the programs were the same. There was no group that was particularly favored on the market. The graduates were sent and then retooled by the employers. The programs were the same. So we were reworking the courses, and the elements of the courses are similar. The outcomes, the learning activities, each one had to contextualize to their program or course, but the structure was the same. When we were collecting data, of course, we collected data from all these different groups, and what we were sharing actually came from the different groups. We didn't segregate it into probably this science or whatever. Maybe that's the step we need to make. But in general, the programs were the same, and we found the improvements were cutting across. In terms of the differences between the public and private universities, in the project, the 3 universities, 2 from Tanzania were public universities, 1 from Uganda was a public university, and only 1 was a private university. And it was very interesting. We had different needs, definitely. Our colleagues in the private universities are more funded than we, the private ones, but the programs were similar, and probably it even propelled us in some ways to push, because this was even a survival for us as a private university. And I will tell you, if it were not TESCEA, during the pandemic, we wouldn't have managed as a private university in Uganda. It is TESCEA that kept us open, and the management also was able to appreciate this. So the benefits in some way may differ, but a lot was similar. And in terms also of gender, probably Flora can add.
Thank you, Albert. I don't think I have much to add there. You have almost put it all. But I just wanted to mention that when we were actually selecting the programs to come on board, as Albert said, we wanted to go across all the programs within the universities which were implementing the TESCEA approach. But within the courses now, we tried as much as possible to have courses that have almost the gender gaps is not as wide initially, so that we can actually have both men and women, or female and male students participate equally, have the experience as equally as possible and as equitably as possible, because we were using the gender responsive pedagogy. But when we went to scaling up into other programs and other courses, we went into programs now that had big gender gaps. And that is how we kind of elicited interest in trying to make the programs as equitable as possible, especially programs like nursing, programs like engineering came on board later. And we noted that actually the years that followed, the advertisements were more considering how the advertisement can bring or can attract both female and male students. So I would say the TESCEA project has actually made changes with parity in enrollment within these programs within the institutions which implemented the TESCEA project.
Great, thank you very much, both of you. I'm aware we haven't got that much longer, but so we have got a couple of other questions I'd like to try and get on into the discussion. Akila is asking from the context of India about with a comparative question really about cultures of systems in different parts of the world. Akila, do you want to ask your question?
Hello, sir.
Hi,
Good
hello,
evening,
how are you doing? Hi.
Good evening, sir. Basically, my question is that, sir, how can we develop certain critical and creative approaches in educational system? Because still, if you see, still in many parts of the world, still some schools there where students are supposed to study whatever is there in their syllabus only, because still some schools lacks a kind of practical learning. So in such scenario, how can we bring certain changes in it? So that's my question.
Great, no, thank you, Akila, because I think that captures the sort of the colonial legacy of a very academic focused sort of top-down approach to curriculum design and the notion of the syllabus. Albert and Flora, do you want to comment, or John?
Well, if I can come in, a very good question, and relating it to what is happening in Uganda. There is a lot of, there's been agitation, but recently there has been a change in the syllabus of the secondary schools to make them more practical and useful to the people. And I think it's working, but probably the way it has been done, there's little connection with what we're doing at the universities, to the extent that there is lack of the trainers who can help these students, help the teaching staff in these schools to effect these changes. And I think what, for me, I love about TESCEA, if they would borrow a leaf, would be to begin from the people in the region, maybe in the country, to effect these changes. But most of the changes were forced from out, imposed somewhere. You have seen it is even in some countries. And the ownership, but also not looking at the different dimensions of it. It's a very great idea, but at the end, it's disjointed in the way it is being, I think, implemented. And I think we have been talking with the Curriculum Development Center in Uganda, telling them, sharing with them what we have done, and I hope they will listen. That's maybe the little I could say about this, but there's been a very big challenge here. The education system has been almost useless to the needs of the people in our context. And the change needs to involve the people to know the needs. And I think that's what TESCEA has been. You begin with the people, what are the needs? And you help them probably to find the solution to make the teaching and learning more practical.
Flora, very quickly, yes, please come in.
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Albert, for that. And yes, that was a very pertinent question, really. And even within Tanzania, there has been a move. There has been a change towards teaching for critical thinking and problem solving. recently the education policy has been changed, and now we are having like 2 streams of teaching. The stream where you have hands-on teaching, the technical aspects of the profession, and this starts from the university, from the secondary school level. And these people, they can go to higher learning institutions with the kind of skills that they have learned through the technical approach. And we have the other stream, which is normally theoretical aspect, which is the type that has been there. So students can opt either to go through the technical kind of schools, and some students can go to the theoretical kind of schools. And those who goes to the theoretical kind of schools have to go to now the university level. The others can end anywhere from secondary, higher education in higher secondary school, or technical education colleges. But right now, the Ministry of the Ministry of Education, is organizing workshops so that university management can come together and see how we can actually align our curricula with problem solving and critical thinking skills. And our curricula now will be redesigned in such a way that they will bring on board this aspect of training, the practical aspect, and the student-centered learning aspect. And we believe TESCEA has contributed something to this because of the kind of workshops which we were running for the 4 years that TESCEA was running, and it involved the regulators and the Ministry of Education. So we are happy that something is happening within the country, and we hope that most universities may end up actually adapting the TESCEA approach.
Well, it is interesting. You slowly, but you have. Thank you, Hila. Great question. You slowly influence change, don't you? Just by keeping the conversation going and involving different people, and the regulators are probably the last to change. But thank you. That's really interesting. We're running out of time. Dawit, you asked if you could ask a question. You have about 30 seconds. If you can ask a really quick final question before we wrap up. Are you able to?
Thank you very much.
Yes.
I'm very glad to be, here in this conversation.
Good.
I'm from Ethiopia, Addis Ababa University. I have one question. It may not directly connected to the project. We know that modern education promises, some argue that the modern education promises unattainable aspirations and futures for students of Africa. To address this, some suggest epistemic delinking. That means delink from the epistemological tyranny of the so-called universal or globalized system of knowledge. So they suggest we should have a paradigmatic change which stops imitativeness, because it blocks self-reliance and hence the nurture of innovative capacity. And they also suggest dealing from the capitalist market order to ensure the employability of students. But the question is, is delinking possible? Because in the current global world order, where partnership is propagated as one of the best strategies of sustainable development, the strategy of delinking not only contradict this global motto, but also bring not convincing ground to suggest so. So one of the presenters suggested rooted in the East African practice, rooting the education in East African practice. So is it possible to link from from this global capitalist system and epistemological tyranny of the once globalized knowledge to make the educational system rooted in African philosophy?
Well,
Thank you.
That's a great question. I'm sorry that we took a long time to get to it, though. I mean, you ask a big epistemic and existential question almost. My presenters have literally 30 seconds to respond, more or less a yes or no. Do you, Albert or Jon or Flora, do you want to really quickly respond?
I would do very fast to respond. I think the whole concept of globalization is ambivalent. There are good things about it and maybe the bad things. Like I said in my presentation, alone it's very hard to find solutions like to the problem we're dealing with if you work in the isolation. I think the key thing is to find the right partners from the globe with whom you can work like we did. And I think we wouldn't have achieved what we achieved if we were working only we in East Africa, but bringing some other colleagues, partners from elsewhere, I think was very rich. I think the key thing is to identify the right partnerships, the right issues.
Brilliant, Albert. That's a great, very Centre for Global Higher Education response, which is it's about selective linking, and hopefully your delinking is selective as well. So thank you. And you know, there was so many calls for more equal partnerships. It seems to me as if you all have created something which is looks very much like an equal partnership, and that seems to have generated lots of interesting insights. Thank you all for coming. Today we have another webinar next Tuesday, as always, at 2 p.m. Next week's is on mobility, so please come back and join us in future. Do use our website, because our website has literally hundreds of recordings and transcripts and slides. I'm looking forward to having many more on African universities, research and teaching. And you're the first under my directorship, so thank you very much, all of you, for coming and presenting today. For now, goodbye. See you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.